Persona 5 Royal is a game that was so innovative and so creative, and to this day is a masterpiece among its JRPG peers. In this video, I provide my interpretation and opinions on each of the 9 villain arcs in the story, and my thoughts about the Phantom Thieves and their character growth as a team. Towards the end of the video, I'll provide my closing analysis and provide detail as to why this JRPG truly stole my heart, and why it's my favorite Mega 10 game, and one of the better JRPGs of all time. It's showtime! Right from the jump, Kamoshida was a prickly joker and so arrogant. He's aware you are the troublemaker transfer student and intends to make your life difficult. At the beginning of the arc, it is rumored that he has been abusing the female and male students of Shujin Academy. He also has a particularly sickening relationship with Shiho, as she is so afraid to relinquish her starting spot that she caves to his demands. Kamoshida also feels that because he has been a successful Olympic athlete, he can do whatever he wants with no recourse. Ryuji and Anne even at some point call him a piece of shit and a monster. And given what you see transpire to the students in his cognition at his Palace of Lust, with the students being tortured in multiple ways, I generally could not wait to put this man in his place. It also doesn't help that Principal Kabayakawa is willing to keep this hush and allow it to keep happening, as the school basically profits from Kamoshida's successes as a coach. After Kamoshida said he would expel Ryuji and Joker, I knew right then this would be a special mission. As his palace is a sort of introductory to the game's mechanics palace, it still provided the aesthetic that, in my opinion, very few JRPGs are able to replicate, since you are made aware that this is in his mind, and this is how he imagines things. The school being his castle, and everyone is his subordinate. When you see how his shadow actually looks, my first reaction that it was a bit ridiculous, but very on par with his views towards himself. Being that he looked goofy, it provided more fuel to the fire in wanting to steal his treasure and to right the injustices that he had done. This kind of goes without saying at this point. Both awakenings of Ryuji from kicking the shit out of him and belittling him, to Anne's awakening realizing that she's in charge and not some sexual object for Kamoshida, were both epic and powerful moments. The boss itself was also a lot of fun, and certainly a good fit thematically, as Kamoshida used cognitive versions of both Shiho and Mishima against the Phantom Thieves. And once the fight is finished, and Kamoshida finally confesses in front of the school, you just knew that the rest of the game was going to have some really significant developments, and this was just the start of it all. Fresh out the victory and confession from Kamoshida, Joker, Ryuji, Anne, and Morgana are really feeling it and ready to take their next steps as a group and take on their more notable target, which brings them to Madarame. The Phantom Thieves are made aware of Madarame through their defeat of Shadow Natsuhiko and Mementos. Natsuhiko was a victim of Madarame's extortion and ended up getting a job in the municipal ward after striking out on his own, where he would constantly stalk his ex-girlfriend and vent his stresses. You first see Madarame when you run into Yusuke as he asks Anne to model for him. In this moment, I got bad vibes from him, as well as in that moment, he just exuded a conman allure, and it turns out I was correct. As you explore his palace, which to no surprise his theme is vanity, and the palace itself is a golden and bright museum, showcasing the art which he stole from his pupils, which is pretty despicable. You also find out that Madarame abuses his pupils and treats them as unpaid labor, and even at one point refers to them as livestock. The guy clearly has issues, and it makes total sense how he has his own palace. It is in this palace Yusuke comes to the revelation that he is but a pawn to Madarame, and the death of his mother didn't matter to Madarame, as she was seen as a means to an end as he gained money and notoriety in the art community. Madarame let his mother die of a seizure so he can steal her artwork of the Sayuri and sell it for a profit, which he later counterfeits. Yusuke's awakening really was an amazing moment too during this part of the story, as he now understood the person he looked up to, didn't respect him, and only viewed him as an expendable piece on his way to fame. The Shadow Madarame boss fight I found to be another test of game mechanics for the player, as you need to exploit the weaknesses of his paintings and use multi-targeting and physical attacks to pick apart different parts of the paintings. Madarame then transforms clones of himself, which also reinforces the player attacking weaknesses and use of the black paint to stymie his attacks. After his defeat, Madarame reconciles with Yusuke and encourages him to exhibit the true Sayuri using his mother's name, returning him back to the father figure that Yusuke used to admire. However, at this point, the palace is collapsing, and Yusuke is able to see past the facade and doesn't seem to care what happens to him after this. Madarame also lets the Phantom Thieves in on the Black Mask, causing trouble in the metaverse, but we find out about this later in the story. After his confession, the Phantom Thieves got their big fish and are really feeling themselves, but want more and also a larger target, which comes in the form of Kaneshiro in our next villain arc. Before I get into that though, I really enjoyed the Madarame arc and the palace, since the training wheels, gameplay-wise, were starting to come off, and both thematically and story-wise. I felt like with Madarame being a genuine conman, that he was really going to get what was coming to him, and it just felt so right after he beat him, and he confesses, losing all of his credibility in the process, I guess you could call that poetic justice. At this point in the story, when you're being interrogated by Sai, she mentions you then targeted a mafia boss, and my initial reaction was, excuse me? It felt like quite a step up from a pedo and a con man, but after finding out that Kaneshiro was the person responsible for exploiting minors through the use of blackmail, and also running a scamming empire out of Shibuya, I simply couldn't wait to see what the palace would be like, and I was not disappointed. This all starts with Principal Kobayakawa asking Makoto Niijima, the school president, to investigate if the Phantom Thieves are students at Shujin Academy. However, Makoto overhears some conversations between Joker and the gang and strikes a deal with them. Prove your justice is legitimate, or risk being exposed to everybody. And so you go about asking around Shibuya for hints of this criminal Makoto hints to blackmailing and ruining lives of young people, involving cases of drugs and extortion. Pretty awful, right? The craziest part of this is when you finally obtain enough information to get to the palace, you come to find it's a flying big fortress and you are unable to infiltrate it straight away. Makoto risks herself by asking Kaneshiro's henchman of his whereabouts in a last-ditch attempt to prove she is useless, prompting the Phantom Thieves to then follow her. This leads to Kaneshiro blackmailing them by taking their pictures in his club, adding that should they fail, Makoto would be forced to sell her body to pay it off, and if Makoto refuses, he will force Sai to sell her off, since she was trying to investigate him. Since you couldn't get into the palace initially, you now can, since Kaneshiro views Makoto as a special customer due to the debt that is owed. Makoto's awakening was also really hyped too, since she feels that she's had enough of feeling inadequate to people and useless, and Kaneshiro really sets her off when he tells Makoto that Sai is going to make a great sex slave. I can't really blame her on that part either, since she loves her sister and the scumbag is talking shit about the family. I would do the exact same in her situation. Everything leading to this point has been super dramatic and drew me in fully. The Bank of Gluttony was certainly befitting of Kaneshiro, and the little ATMs in his distortion of the metaverse also helped set the tone. Another thing I liked is with this boss fight, the game does a few references, and as you know with the bosses so far in this game, they reflect the ruler's personality, and as so, Kaneshiro is a fly. I interpreted this as a reference to the Lord of the Flies, or Bile, which is associated with the sin of gluttony. Pretty on the nose in my opinion. This boss fight also teaches the player the mechanics on ailments, and more specifically, the use of sleep and fear, so the use of items is essential to a successful battle. You can use this against the henchmen and get additional technical damage in the fight, and utilize the use of guarding for when Piggytron uses the Mega Attack to tank the damage. Now after all this is said and done, and you've beaten Kaneshiro, he alludes to the Black Mask again, and feels the Phantom Thieves are so powerful, they could do whatever they really wanted instead of a righteous path. What is different in this arc, as well, is Kaneshiro doesn't really have a full confession like Kamoshida and Madarame, atoning for his sins, but is detained by the police. So while it's not as satisfying of an end, you are still able to come out on top and stop the crime lord, which was still the objective the Phantom Thieves wanted in taking down a bigger fish than Madarame and Kamoshida. The next arc is interesting because it shows us that not all palaces are people with a malicious intent. Not long after the Phantom Thieves have dealt with Kaneshiro, they begin to receive threats from a mysterious hacker group known as Medjed, who threaten to cleanse the Phantom Thieves and their supporters. Futaba begins sending messages to Joker under the alias Alibaba and has to steal her heart in exchange for helping deal with Medjed. When Joker tries to get more information from Alibaba, they become flustered and try to cancel the deal. However, knowing that the heart cannot be stolen without them knowing more about her, Alibaba reluctantly starts to help more with things as they continue to get worse with Medjed. Makoto is able to figure out that Futaba was Alibaba, and that they should go to Sojiro's house to talk to her, and they did not force her to come out and allow her to communicate through the chat. She told Joker that she wanted to die shutting herself in a room, that inputs the keyword tomb by accident into the protagonist's navigator, transporting the party into her palace. However, exploration was halted when Futaba's heart started to instinctively reject them, causing Shadow Futaba to appear and drop a boulder on them, forcing escape. Her cognitive world is that of a pyramid, that her tomb is where a really cool design of hieroglyphics and codes are running along the walls and the interior. While the palace itself is not particularly difficult in my opinion, the puzzles themselves where you learn about Futaba's past with the coping from the death of her mother, Wakaba, who was studying cognitive science at the time, and how the adults were treating her so horribly leading to her agoraphobia and depression. After you're done learning everything about her past, you really feel that she deserves to be saved, and that she should never have been treated this way, since she was going through a grieving process and only made to feel worse by the adults. After the Phantom Thieves advance through the palace, they run into the Sphinx of Futaba's mother, and are beaten to the point of questioning how they can win this battle. Futaba finds the metanav on her phone, and enters her own palace much to everyone's surprise. She is forced to face her own fear as her shadow urges her to remember her mother's death. Recalling that her mother's death was unnatural, and realizing that she had been deluding herself, Futaba awakens her persona power, She then helps the party defeat the cognitive existence of her mother that she created, who wishes she was never born. The battle with Futaba itself is more a matter of being cautious and using items to heal and using guard and the proper attacks to deal heavy damage to the Sphinx. I personally relied on physical damage a lot myself after I shot her down from the sky, and kept the party at a good amount of health to handle the heavy strikes that came. After the battle at her own palace, Futaba folds her into the bargain, hacking into Medjed's website to stop them from further bothering the Phantom Thieves. This does no damage to Medjed, however, and is merely part of the conspiracy's plan, due to Medjed itself being an impersonator, and the actual Medjed is Futaba herself. After the Phantom Thieves change her heart, she finally comes out of her shell and starts to go outside, regularly visiting Café Leblanc, interacting with the protagonist and his friends, and eventually joining the Phantom Thieves of Hearts to find the culprit truly responsible for her mother's death. She reveals she created the original Medjed identity and later gave her hacking scripts to a group of friends. But when counter-hacking the hostile Medjed, she realizes that they do not use her distinct programs. From there, she deduces that someone else must have stolen their name. In addition, she reveals to the team the suspicious ways that her mother's condition degenerated before she died, and that her physical notes were the only research that hadn't been destroyed, and are possibly the only way to find the ones who forged the note that ruined her life. With Futaba now a part of the team and motivated to find out who caused all this pain for her, which comes later in the story, this palace and Ark are one of the more interesting themes and palaces in the game, since you are at this point expecting someone to be a horrible person, and they flip the script on you. Now, I know so many people hate this next part of the game, but having done 2 playthroughs, it really wasn't as bad as people make it out to be. The Ark of Okumura also sets things in motion, which provide heavy ramifications later in the game. Let's discuss. It is at this point in the story where the Phantom Thieves have dealt with Medjed that Okumura's name begins to climb the ranking on the fan site. It is alluded that his business practices are sketchy at best, and that people want him investigated and his heart changed. It is also within this arc that you find out that Okumura's daughter Haru is going to be part of an arranged marriage. My initial thoughts at this point, after entering his palace and seeing the spaceport, was first a feeling of awe that a palace ruler was able to take it a step further than a floating bank, but also a feeling of shock at how Okumura viewed his employees as expendable robots to be replaced whenever they broke down. I hate to use this comparison, but I really got an Amazon warehouse vibe from this palace, and I was feeling extra motivated to change Okumura's heart, knowing he can have so little disregard for life for the sake of profits and political aspirations. Now, I also know a lot of you guys seem to hate the airlock puzzles and the boss fight for this palace, and that is fair. However, after 2 playthroughs, I never really had any trouble with it. I think I mainly attributed this to trial and error and to following the patterns, or maybe I just have a lot of patience for these types of things. I even understand why the boss fight is so irritating, and why a lot of folks had to use the merciless difficulty to get it done. The key for me was the baton pass with multi-targeting the correct weaknesses, and it was a breeze if you feel like cheesing. Go ahead and use some all body attacks if you have it via the DLC personas or not. Now, thematically, consider the waves and waves of robot employees he is sending after you in this battle, further illustrating my point. He does not give 2 shits about the welfare of his workforce until he eventually runs out of robots to send after you, and even shockingly sends his cognitive version of Haru to fight you. It is funny that you really think that he might have some sort of high-level powers himself, but he's nothing more than a pushover and is so easily defeated. When his treasure is stolen, he attempts to reveal the identity of the head of the group that is behind the mental shutdowns, but the thieves are forced to retreat because of the tight time limit. When Shido Okumura is left alone, Goro Akechi shoots and kills it, even in death. Shido Okumura couldn't let go of his utopia, and was never able to return to his real self. With the gang celebrating at Tokyo Destinyland, you're led to believe you're going to be an unstoppable force after changing the heart of Jeff Bezos' light. And then one of the more shocking moments in the game happens. Okumura, after confessing to his crimes, suffers a mental shutdown and dies live on screen in the most gruesome way. The Phantom Thieves are left in bewilderment at what they just saw, and Haru ultimately leaves to deal with the loss of her father, even if he was a horrible person. After some time, Haru collects herself and vows to find out who caused this and to put an end to the madness. Before I lead into the next arc, I do also want to quickly point out that the time frame between Futaba's palace and Okumura's was a bit long and could have spared to be just a bit shorter. With that said, it's finally time to talk about one of my favorite arcs in the game, and still my favorite palace, the Niijima arc. I personally love the way this is structured, because from the beginning of the game to this point, you've been interrogated by Sai this whole time, as you recall from the past events, after you've been captured by the police and sold out by your teammate. Sai questions many things from your testimony, from a talking cat, dimensions of the metaverse, to the monsters within it. The dynamic between Makoto and Sai is on full display during the lead-up to the infiltration of the palace, as Sai at one point calls Makoto a burden to her, even though she does apologize. We were shown why she has a cognitive palace since the death of her father, and the pressure of raising Makoto while trying to get ahead in a male-dominated industry no doubt led to its manifestation. As Sai has been asked to investigate the mental shutdowns by the SIU director, she questions Sojiro about Wakaba's research, even though he holds back any information to her. All the while, Makoto steals information about the case from her sister's laptop. Later, Sai notices that her laptop has been tampered with and refuses to acknowledge that her sister would ever do that. When Akechi forces himself into the Phantom Thieves, he suggests that the gang should steal Sai's heart to stop her investigation, as they are already suspected for the death of Okumura and Principal Kabayakawa. With Akechi on board and Makoto having given Sai the calling card, they enter what I consider to be the coolest theme and best all-around experience in the game, as you go from hacking rigged slot machines, to battle royales, to a dark maze in a palace. Even the Sai boss fight itself was a lot of fun, as you got to place bets on yourself until you figured out that you had to break the glass covering the roulette wheel, which, if you hadn't done this, it could either hurt or heal you depending on the choice. The Leviathan portion of the battle too was cool, since honestly, I was never expecting her to turn into something that hideous, and afterwards, Makoto gets to reconcile with Sei, and with her heart changed, they soon notice that they're being ambushed by a police squadron and are forced to flee. After this, Joker gets captured, and you can sell it your teammates if you wish, but honestly, who the hell did that? I never did in any playthrough, and since the upcoming third semester is simply too good to miss, Sai apologizes to Futaba for putting pressure on Sojiro, and reconciles with Makoto, and vows to wholeheartedly help the Phantom Thieves. Also, one other thing I want to point out about this arc too is, consider the ramifications of having a criminal prosecutor on the side of a vigilante organization like the Phantom Thieves. I think that in of itself is a really nice touch, and really, I just think Sei's a great character as well. This moves us into our next arc, and still to this day it's not my favorite for what should be an epic crescendo with Shido. Before I get into the meat of this arc, I want to point out that the lead up to this was very well done, as you've been building more and more with each palace, and each villain was more devious than the last, save for Sai and Futaba. In this sense, I view those more as key pieces to the story's progression, as Futaba helped with Medjed, and Sai was able to halt the persecution that the SIU director was aiming for, and became an important ally against Shido. I think what bothered me the most about Shido is while you only see him a couple times prior to becoming a student as Shujin, it was never really explained, and I never found any details providing some sort of amnesia. Now with that being said, let's talk about the actual arc. Shido's running for Prime Minister, and prior to his campaign, he had run-ins with Sojiro when they both worked for the government, before Sojiro had enough, and then opened LeBlanc. There was not a lot of detail about him, other than he was ruthless and would remove anyone who basically stood in his way. We later found out that he would use the metaverse to provide his means to an end, and that in the strange twist of the game, he found out that Akechi is actually his son, and was presumably conceived from a Lady of the Night. It's really no wonder Akechi has issues, huh? Shido had been using Akechi once he discovered his power to assassinate Wakaba Ishiki, as well as Okumura and Principal Kabayakawa. Akechi and Shido both aim to kill each other once Shido reaches his inauguration. Akechi, even prior to this, hates Shido if you hang out with him enough during the confidant rank-ups. Shido is also the mastermind behind Medjed with the IC president on his ship Palace, alluding to this. Speaking of his ship Palace, I view this as an important piece that I want to talk about here. I actually love the design of the palace and the ship itself, and the significance that Shido views Japan as sinking, and he is the only one who can rise above it and save everyone. Even the soundtrack used for this palace provided a sort of majestic vibe that Shido, I'm sure, views himself as. What still irks me is this palace, I feel, is poorly executed after the build-up, because you are searching each part of the ship for the prerequisite ship attendees to get all the letters of introduction. During this, you go through a series of rat mazes, which I did find to be much easier the second time around, but nonetheless felt really tedious. And after you do all that, you have a nice epic fight with Akechi, where he reveals everything and goes berserk, and shows you just how powerful he really is. After he is defeated, and you still offer to help him, he laments his actions, and a cognitive version of Akechi takes him out, or does he actually? With this next part, I consider this to be a really awesome way to send the calling card, and it really puts the public on notice as they broadcast it everywhere, and it shows the Phantom Thieves are coming for him, and everyone will know about it, and there won't be anywhere else to hide. The boss battle itself was a little lackluster in my personal opinion. Provided you're level proper, and you have some items to help out, it feels really more like a battle of attrition, and Shido evolves into different forms, from a military outfit on a lion, to a pyramid of the public, which he views as sacrifices that are all but inevitable. After you've beaten him enough, he turns into his Dragon Ball Z form, which can tank quite a bit of damage, but is not too bad, provided you have a good healer on your team, and you use the proper items again. You get to finish him off in an epic 1v1 duel. When Shido in the real world senses his defeat, he asks a doctor to put him into suspended animation from a pill. Totally normal procedure under these circumstances, I guess, right? So this causes his palace to collapse in hopes of killing the Phantom Thieves, which, you guessed it, does not happen. Fast forward to his election day victory, and he starts confessing his involvement in everything. Now, while you think this would be a thrilling conclusion to the game, it's not quite over yet, as the public still isn't totally won over by the Phantom Thieves, even though Shido is in custody, and Sojiro has been freed of interrogation from his cronies, and most everything at this point has been cleaned up and exposed by the Phantom Thieves. The next part of the story arc will come as a little surprise to those JRPG fans that have been here since the beginning. We now have to kill a god, but more on that in just a moment. Just when you think you can finally start to celebrate your victories, another twist happens. When Shido is in custody and you think the public would be concerned about who will lead Japan, but rather they seem to be filled with doubt about the Phantom Thieves' existence. Since this now involves the general public, it is now implied you need to check out what is happening in Mementos. Discovering the prison of regression and doing the puzzles and learning that the public wanted to simply stop thinking about themselves was certainly an interesting twist. The whole design of Mementos itself was actually really cool too, being that people would just willingly go there. It was actually sort of creepy in a way. What was also wild was seeing all the previous bosses like Kamoshida and Shido's shadows just being okay with whatever happens next as they feel so tired of trying anymore. During all this, it is implied that Yaldabaoth set Shido up for power and allowed the Phantom Thieves to gain notoriety, and allowed the meddling in the Shido conspiracy. If you were a new player at this point, what comes next was actually pretty cool in the fight with the Holy Grail and Yaldabaoth. The scale of these fights was pretty cool, and to this point takes everything you have, leaving you feeling like you're truly fighting a god of epic proportions. I had a nice challenge with it, and what happens after you defeat Yaldabaoth gets me every single time I played this game. When you think Morgana is dying after feeling his mission has been completed, I simply get choked up every time, and I don't really care who knows this. I knew they wouldn't kill off that important of a character, but it's still a roller coaster of emotions for this whole game. So with the public back supporting the Phantom Thieves after Yaldabaoth's defeat, and the end of the year is coming up, a celebration is to be had before the New Year's. And depending on the choices you made to this point, the game's fun does not stop there, and for good reason. Because what comes next is my favorite piece of additional content that Atlus has done, and that is Maruki's Palace in the center of Melancholy. I want to start this off by saying that the third semester is my favorite section in any Persona game, and quite possibly all of Megaten. I don't care if you think it's a hot take or not, since everything start to finish was so well done by Atlus for this part of the game. Right after New Year's, and things have settled down from Shido, you start to take your foot off the gas, right? Well, not just yet. You start to notice subtle distortions that you can miss if you're not paying attention, and you and your friends are living their best lives with people who are supposed to be dead, or not human. More specifically, looking at Morgana and Wakaba. Then all of a sudden, you have Akechi walking in who is supposed to be dead. What exactly is going on at this point? Everyone is simply way too oblivious and happy, and there's no crime or conflicts that you're aware of. Akechi and you both agree at this point that something is off, and you agree to investigate the root cause. Joker then talks to the Phantom Thieves, leaving a sense of doubt within them, and Akechi does things on his end. They agree to help you take back reality, and with that, there are significant ramifications involving Kasumi, and how she herself is dealing with grief, the same way Maruki is illustrated when you infiltrate the palace with Joker, Akechi, and Kasumi. Now Kasumi during this whole ordeal knows that there's a false sense of reality and she wants to change it, but she still has doubts about herself, and Maruki early on convinces her to let go and enjoy the current reality with no pain. After you've beaten Kasumi in battle, she then understands that she has to stand on her own 2 feet as Sumire, and stops trying to live as Kasumi, and do things for herself, and realize that she can accomplish her goals. This to me is powerful since we all struggle at some point in our lives in one form or another, and Sumire overcoming her struggles is a really great part of this. On to my next point about why I like this whole arc as well. As well, the palace itself has a story ramification, that being that Shido denied Maruki funding to have his research center built in Odaiba over some insufficient evidence, to Maruki losing his loved one over her inability to remember him, and his persona awakening was also super cool when Azathoth formed a contract with him during the Mementos merge with reality. It all ties back together, and the design itself was amazing, and the puzzles were really fun, so you never really felt like it was a tedious experience. Another thing I want to mention is Maruki is known as a gentle madman, and I feel that is appropriate because I really don't feel as though he was a bad person per se, and he never really did want to hurt anyone, but he did want everyone to live in a sense of harmony, even though his execution of his vision did come off as a bit twisted. It makes sense why you'd reject this reality, and I had done so in my playthrough, but sometimes you wonder if I hadn't, what would it be like? But then the feelings of uneasiness comes over me, and I don't reconsider that thought. The boss battle with Maruki and Azathoth on the first leg is truly truly a legendary JRPG battle to me. The fight is literally for reality itself, and the stakes are never higher. It took everything I had in my first playthrough, and most of it in my second, even after good leveling. Then Maruki goes and takes it to another level, and involves this persona into Adam Kadmon. You really aren't sure if you can make it at this point, and for good reasons, as Adam Kadmon is a primordial man in lore after all. After Futaba finds the weakness, you finish it off with a cinematic headshot, and you try and escape as the palace starts to crumble. Maruki draws you in one last time, and you have an epic fistfight until you both have nothing left. At this point, Maruki realizes the error in his ways, and even with you trying to save him, he falls into the abyss. With reality seemingly back to normal now, and Joker cleared of all charges after being in lockup, you say your goodbyes in a heartfelt manner, and in a nice twist depending on your ending choices, Maruki shows up as a cab driver and drives you off to the station with the Phantom Thieves diverting the authorities away. As you look out of the window, you see a hint of Akechi, and a flash of the metaverse still existing, with Joker smiling. Now that is how you end an arc right there, guys. For this section of the video, I want to talk about my thoughts on the Phantom Thieves as the cast, and their growth as you go throughout the story. I have to say that the Phantom Thieves, as much as I've joked about them in the past, are my favorite Mega 10 casts besides SMT4. Each member had a good background that tied them to the palaces as you progressed, and each member had their own personal demons to overcome on the way to maxing their social links to get their mythological personas for the endgame. My personal favorite arcs were Yusuke and Akechi. Yusuke had to deal with living under the wing of a fraud, and had to deal with his own set of grief after his mother's passing, and was able to build himself up into being an even better artist. Akechi, while it seems so many hates him, I liked him. He was the cocky detective who had a troubled upbringing, and the more you learned about him, the cooler he got. With Ryuji, he was able to work his way back into the track team and make amends. Haru, if I'm to make a joke about it, had very little screen time, and I felt like a second playthrough was needed in order to max the link. Makoto was viewed as the goody two-shoes and didn't feel like she was worth anything to anyone, but was able to change herself and make amends with her older sister and herself as she works to join law enforcement in her future. Even Morgana, as much as he gets memed, is still a great character, and he is the fulcrum that holds the team together and provides some comic relief. And none of them felt forced into the story, other than Kasumi, but it just seems like they really wanted to save that all for the last palace, instead of spreading it out over the course of the game. It works, but it's a minor gripe to me. To this day though, I never really cared as much about Futaba, even though she's still a great character. I just usually don't focus on the kindness stat a lot. This also needs to be said, but I even liked all the Phantom Thieves gear and designs, and I felt like it had way more personality when you compare it to a previous game like Persona 4. Alright, so full stop, this is what really sold me on the game, even more so than the story itself, to be honest. The combat in this game is so fun and so swaggy with its utilization of the baton pass, social link combat upgrades that you get from Shinya and Hifumi, allowing you to rain bullets on ambushes, and freely swapping team members regardless of the turn to help attack enemies' weaknesses, and the showtime mechanic. It's always fun seeing Haru and Makoto do an elbow drop from the top rope for max damage. I also loved how each palace's design was a perfect reflection of their rulers and provided a new and fun challenge along the journey to the endgame. Think about it. You start off in a king's castle and end up in a mental treatment center, more or less. You are literally going from one end of the spectrum to another, and I cannot give enough credit to the developers for doing such a fantastic job with this. I hope through the course of this video, you're really able to understand my points I was trying to convey with just how special this JRPG is to me. With full disclosure, Persona 5 Royal brought back my love that I initially had with JRPGs as early as Final Fantasy I, but took that love and turned it all the way up to 100. There simply are too few games out there where you connect so well with the characters of the game, and the levels just made sense to me. This JRPG has truly stolen my heart, and I hope the Phantom Thieves steal your hearts as well. That concludes my video, so if you've enjoyed my content, please remember to like and subscribe, and let's keep growing this channel. StarSoldier17, out.